Okay, here we are continuing in our study of eldership. What is this, video number 5? I'm losing count, but whatever number it is, if you're jumping in right here, go back to video 1, watch all the videos in sequence, look up all the verses. You're not going to get maximum benefit out of this series unless you do that. So we've been talking about the qualifications of elders. We've looked at the general qualifications, the moral qualifications. We've already looked up all the verses. We might make reference back to them. Here's one, though, that I think is a sticky one. These are the domestic qualifications. The elder is to be a one-woman man. Now, this is translated the husband of one wife. Now, if you look over in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2, it says he's the husband of one wife. And if you look the qualification for deacons, this is mentioned as well. He's the husband of one wife. And if you look over again in the Titus list, in Titus chapter 1, husband of one wife. This Greek phrase is the same all the way through. It literally says he is of one woman or one wife, a man. Now, people have argued about what this really means. Does it mean he's not a polygamist? Well, it would certainly mean that, because there was polygamy in the ancient Greek culture, the Roman culture. And certainly it could mean that. It could mean that he's a one-woman man in the sense that he doesn't cheat on his wife. He's not out, playing the field on his wife. But the real sticky question is, what about a person who's been divorced? Can a person who has been divorced be an elder? Well, now again, the overarching and overriding qualification is above reproach. So now the question would be, can a person who has ever been divorced be above reproach? And I think the answer to that is a clear yes, he could be. And again, you got to look at the circumstances. Many times people, when they're young, they get married, and maybe it's before they're a Christian or even after they're a Christian, and things don't work out, and maybe there's biblical grounds for a divorce, and it happens. And certainly, divorce is not the unpardonable sin. Now, on the other hand, if you look over in 1 Timothy chapter 5, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, it gives a list of requirements or qualifications for church-supported widows. And one of the things that is required for church-supported widows in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 9, it says, "Let the widow be put on the list only if she is not less than 60 years old, having been the wife of one man." It literally says, a woman of one man, or of one man a woman. It is exactly the same Greek phrase as used for the elder. Now it's clear here that this is talking about a woman who only had one husband her whole life. Now some theologians, Wayne Grudem in his Systematic Theology, argues that this speaks of a past situation, because all of the qualifications for the church widows are talking about past qualifications, past experiences, whereas the qualifications for elder are all present. They're all things that are going on right then in the person's life. So he's not presently the husband of two wives. Well, now, if you look at this list for the widow, I find a mixture of past experiences and present experiences. So I'm not sure that argument, for me, really holds a lot of weight. The question I would have about this is that if you would require for a widow to be on the payroll of the church and to receive support, and you would require of her that she had only been married once her whole life, why then would you lower the bar in the case of an elder and say that husband of one wife could mean that a divorce was permissible? Now that's where it gets sticky for me. But I would not be so dogmatic as to say that if you had somebody who fit every qualification and had been divorced maybe one time in their past, that you wouldn't consider them. But then again, you wouldn't want everybody on your board of elders to be a divorced person, would you? Because the elders set an example. And it doesn't set a very good example to younger men to have a whole board full of guys that have been divorced. Because what that says, what that communicates is that, in the church, we mirror the culture. The divorce rate's 1 out of 2, I think, 50%, maybe even higher. It's pretty much the same in the church. So if your elder board reflects that, what you're really doing is saying, well, that's just the way it is and it's okay. But if you have elders that have successfully maintained their marriage and they've stayed married, then what you are really saying is this is where the bar is. This is the ideal. And it's doable because we've got men in the church who have done it. And they can show you how to do it. In any event, you young guys, make it your ambition to get married one time and to stay married. I would not say that a person who's been divorced could not be an elder because, look at Timothy. He wasn't even married. He didn't even probably have any children, and yet he was a traveling, itinerant pastor-teacher. But then again, the elders, they hunker down and they stay put in one place. They're the ones in there for the long haul, and they have to set an example. So I think this is something we need to use discretion on. Now, certainly, if you've got a person who has stood up multiple times, I've seen cases where, you have a man who has stood up, made vows between God and witnesses, not once, not twice, but 3 times, and broken those vows. And all of his kids got maybe farmed out to the moms, and he didn't raise any of them himself. That person cannot be considered as an elder because you're sending a message that says that kind of behavior and that kind of history is okay, when it's not. You see, if a person shows repeatedly that he cannot stay married, if he shows repeatedly that he cannot raise children, then regardless of what else might be right about his life, in the most important areas of life, that person has proven that he's a loser, and you cannot have losers for leaders. Now, I realize that if somebody's going to fix your muffler, if he can do the job, you don't care if he's a drunk. You don't care if he's been divorced 3 or 4 times. You don't care if he's never raised any kids or if he beats his wife. You just want him to fix your muffler. And we had a president a few years ago who was a real loser in his personal life as far as his marriage. But, people said, well, it's not part of his job description. At least he gets the job done. And professional athletes are forever saying, well, hey, I'm not a role model. I'm a professional athlete. I do my job. Doesn't matter what I do off the court or off the field. In the church, it doesn't work that way. In the church, the men that are at the highest levels of leadership have to set an example. You do not want losers for leaders. You do not want men who have proven in their personal lives in the most important areas. And that would be their marriages and the way they love their kids and conduct their household. You do not want losers for leaders, because if you get losers for leaders, your team's going to lose. I mean, you wouldn't pick a team captain or a coach or a manager for a team who had a losing record and a history of losing, would you? So you don't want losers for leaders. Now, that doesn't mean that a person who's been divorced as a young man is disqualified from being an elder. I think you got to look at this on an individualistic and somewhat subjective basis sometimes. But he's a one-woman man. He's hospitable. He manages his household well. If he can't manage something as small as a household, how's he going to take care of a church? His children are under control. And so he's able to handle his household. So those are the domestic qualifications.